This is Dave Moss of the Unfunded List, and I'm pleased to bring you the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Hello from New York City. It's late July, and I'm spending the weekend at the Nexus Global Summit. Friends of the show will be familiar with Nexus because I talk about it a lot. It's an international network of social entrepreneurs and funders who convene regional summits in every continent and host a flagship event, the one I'm at, every year in New York City. And so to give everyone who could not attend a taste of what a Nexus conversation sounds like, I brought my microphones along this year. On the second day of the conference, I met a wonderful young lady from Taiwan named Lilian Wang, who was able to provide us with an international perspective on the conference. I hope you enjoy. Okay, great. Day 2 at Nexus, and I am here with Lilian Wang. Hi, Lilian. How are you? Welcome.
Good. Hi, everyone. My name is Lilian Wang.
Is this your first time at Nexus?
First time at the Nexus Global Summit.
So you've been to some of the regional summits then?
That's right.
Where did you?
So I only did Art Basel and NASA.
Art Basel and NASA.
Yeah.
Oh, so those were not regional summits, I think, but delegation trips or something,
That's
right? I've never been on one of those.
Yeah, they're amazing.
So just to explain for folks, so Nexus does a big global summit, which is where we're at, right? And then also regional summits. I go to the U.S. summit every year, and also this global summit here. But there's also been there've been Caribbean summits, MENA summits, Latin American summits, Asian summits, and India summit. I think 40 total events, and only 16 were the global or U.S. But they also do some like delegations and trips and stuff. So I know they've been to the NASA Space Center, right? Goddard
right.
Space Center.
In Palo Alto.
Yeah, and I'll want to hear about that in a moment. But they've also been, I think they went to like the North Pole or something.
Really?
Yeah, I think they did.
I missed that.
I think they did a trip to the North Pole a few years ago, or very far up into the Arctic. I don't know if they went all the way to the. I don't know if that's like. I guess someone did it, right? What was his name? Lord Skelton or whatever.
Yeah.
But some interesting delegation trips like that. It's a very cool community.
Yeah.
If you're young and in the social impact space, you should consider trying to join one of these events. And maybe you'll end up on a future episode of Open Door Philanthropy, because I'm often here with my microphones talking about philanthropy. So was NASA the first place you went?
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me, how did that happen? How did you get invited? Why did you go?
So I got invited by the Environmental Sustainability Group, and and I just really wanted to know about the science that NASA was doing. So I was very fortunate to get to spend time with NASA scientists and geek out on science. So it was really incredible. Yeah.
You are a scientist?
Yeah, I'm a scientist by training.
What sort of, as I understand, there are different kinds of scientists.
Yeah, for sure.
What kind of scientist are you?
Yeah, so I am actually trained as a geneticist, immunologist. I started a PhD in the field of immunology, and then I wrapped out with a master's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good. I have a BA in theater.
Amazing.
And
how to do that.
And a high school diploma.
That's amazing.
So how did you come to? So you say they invited you to come. How did you know somebody in the community? How did that sort of thing happen?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think what it was that I always knew that my life was about how to create the most amount of impact in my as an.
You've always known that?
Yeah.
When you were a baby?
Probably around
an infant.
13 or.
Walking
15.
around one, you knew that. 15 or.
Yeah, 13 or 15 or so when I started volunteering. So I knew then.
You started. So one of the questions that I like to ask folks, and we in fact did a little event with Nexus a little while ago, where we created what we called giving videos. And so I asked a bunch of Nexus members to tell me the story of their first gift.
Yeah.
The first time they ever gave something, right?
Wow.
Which is almost always, you're a child, right? And so one of the reasons I like this question, we often think about philanthropy as just a simple, like, financial transaction, which is a big part of philanthropy. Organizations need money, people's salaries need to be paid, right? But it's not the sum total. And so I really like to ask this question to really get at people's real giving motivations before you were making your own money, before you like had figured out your worldview? Like, what was it and so just to give you some examples, like, it's one of my personal favorites, my buddy Ben Swig, thought about it for a while, and he remembered that when he was young, he used to help his elderly neighbor with her groceries.
Yeah.
Some other folks, I really like Avi's. So he was, has an Indian heritage, but he's raised here in America. But his parents are from India, and they took him on a trip to India, and that's when he first saw like really big poverty and everything. And he remembers being very young over there in India and seeing like people on the street asking for money, and he like threw a tantrum basically, and refused to leave until they had like given money to like every single one of the beggars there and everything. It was very nice. So same question for you. Do you remember the first time that you felt compelled to give something or help someone?
Yeah, let me think.
Well, you mentioned just now that you were volunteering at 13 or so.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I feel like, growing up in Asia, in Taiwan specifically, the culture is so community-based. You don't really grow to have an individuality. So it's not really part of the culture. So you don't really, walk around and think about what you want to do or who you are. You just kind of do what you're expected to do, and then you learn, and try to be the best, right? And then so I think I really came into being when I moved to Vancouver, Canada, when I was 13. And then pretty much, I'm not sure really honestly exactly when, probably anywhere from when I was 13 to 15.
We're not going to fact check this.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just thinking, I can't remember exactly.
Actually, you were wrong. You were 14 when you started volunteering there, and you said 13, and so now we can't.
Yeah. So somewhere along that time frame, I just felt really compelled to help, and then so I don't know how I even knew how to do that, but I just, I went to local community centers, and I just asked how I can help, right? And then so I would just tutor kids, and then I would, just randomly with no guidance. I have no idea how I did that. It was super bizarre. I would just have clothing drives, and I'll like get everyone to donate clothes, and I'll donate it out, and then I'll just do all kinds of things like that. And then I remember I would do it. I would go to school at 7, and I never go home until about 7 p.m. Yeah, just so that I can do all these things. And just try to help. And
you went on your own to the community center.
Yeah, and just asked.
This wasn't your parents didn't bring you? Were you encouraged to do this?
No, I literally would take
How did you find out where the community center is?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't remember exactly, actually.
It's fine. One of the things that happens when I ask this question is like people don't always remember all of the details, and I find that
so interesting.
I find that's okay because I'm trying to get at your like what fundamentally makes you tick now, right?
Yeah,
so it's not that important for me that we get all the details right of your actual first. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't remember the specifics,
so
right? Yeah, no, it's understandable. It's why I want to like this is not we're not doing science right now. I'm trying to get you to like to think hard about why you do this first. So you meant a clothing drive. You were tutoring. So I assume you were a good student.
Yeah.
You became a scientist and working on a PhD and stuff. So probably were a good student.
Yeah. Or more so, did not want to get a real job in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pursuing a PhD is a really great way to never have a great job.
Yeah,
Shout out to my parents, a couple of college professors.
I know. Always intellectually stimulated, and you never have to think about how to find a real job.
The angriest my mother's ever been with me is one time she was saying something, and I really disagreed with what she was saying. I was like, but Mom, you've never had a job.
Touche.
I mean, she's been a tenured professor for a very long time, and so it's a sort of lost perspective on what it's like to have to hustle or whatever.
Yeah, we also remember it's extremely difficult to be a tenured professor. That's less than.
She's very accomplished. Yeah.
She's very accomplished.
But I wouldn't I know a lot of like blue collar workers as well, and people who've like really had to work hard their whole career, and like what my mother does is important, and she's very accomplished at it, but like she's not baling hay.
Yeah, totally.
She's literally never sweat in her life.
I know. Yeah.
I think broken nail may be the worst thing that's ever happened to her.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mom, for picking on you here. Obviously she listens to every episode of her son's book. But you mentioned that you grew up in Taiwan?
Yeah, so I was born.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Taiwan, and it was very fascinating because I simultaneously grew up helping my grandpas on the farm in the summers, as well as hang out in the country clubs in the summers, and I literally couldn't tell the difference between the two. To me, it's the same. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Tell me about Taiwanese country clubs.
Yeah, I don't remember. It was really good food, and it was very safe, and then as kids you can run around, and then everyone's very friendly, so it's really great. Yeah.
That's right. As I mentioned, my parents are college professors.
Yeah.
My mom is on the board of Unfunded List, so she's the one that I talk about most often on the podcast.
Yeah.
But my father is a golf historian, and he wrote a book about country clubs.
Oh,
actually, he's written quite a few books about country clubs.
Nice.
And I was a member of Waterville Country Club in Maine, which is a very interesting place. Most people think of country clubs as very elite institutions, and there certainly are some that exist that way. There's here in America we have Augusta National, which for a long time was very controversial because they only had white male members, and particularly after Tiger Woods won their main tournament at their course, but wouldn't have been able to be a member there.
Oh wow, that's insane.
It's very great. Now they do have some black and female members. In fact, their first black member was also their first female member. Condoleezza Rice.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny to think that I don't think there's a club in the world that would be like, no, we won't have Condoleezza Rice as a member.
Sure.
But maybe probably some liberal clubs, right? But for them this was a big decision, and they're patting themselves on the back for how inclusive they're being, extending an opportunity to Condoleezza Rice, the Chancellor of Stanford, right? To have this, to be able to finally make it into the big boys network, right?
Yeah, I know. On that, I'm exceptionally proud of my Canadian lineage as well.
So you're part Canadian. You didn't just move there.
Yeah, I moved to Canada when I was 13, and I have to say, Canadians are incredible. We moved there, and then my dad literally walked into a tennis club, which at the time probably only had maybe 2 Asian members. And he just walks in with his broken English and said, "I'm a very important person. You want me?" And then the president literally found him 2 persons to write reference letters for him, even though you should have had networking connections. And
interesting.
Yeah, and then we joined Shaughnessy Golf Club, and very similar thing. Everyone, Canadians are just very, very friendly. The country is founded on with 2 cultures, French and French and English. So.
Well, I would say more than that, there's also considerable indigenous population.
Absolutely, yeah. So the culture is very embracing.
And especially I'm from Maine, so I'm more familiar with the eastern part of Canada.
Yeah.
But in the Vancouver area and stuff, there's a tremendous amount. I mean, you're not the only Taiwanese family that moved there.
No, I'm
surprised that there wouldn't have been more Asian. I mean, I think of Vancouver as as having a lot of Asian citizens.
For sure, but it's really fascinating because even though I'm pretty sure if I actually think back, there were no other Asians in these country clubs. But I never felt like there was any racism. I was just always colorblind and gender blind. I was just like, I'm part of everybody.
Yes.
This is amazing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you play golf?
No. My parents decided to learn. My parents decided to learn how to play golf once I moved away for university, so I never learned.
I see. So we were just sort of hanging out at the club?
Yeah.
That's very good. The club I grew up at was very much like you wouldn't, if you didn't play golf, boy, would you have been bored there. There was no tennis, there was no pool, there was a restaurant, which was nice. And actually, I remember it was very strange to me. I heard that there were members who only came to the club. Right? It's just some restaurant to get burgers in and stuff.
No, really.
And they paid a lot to be part of this club, and they didn't even play golf at all. And it didn't make any sense to me.
I never understood the hoity-toity part of that. For me, it was just I can go and eat anywhere else in the city, but it would be very stressful, right? But then here it was everyone's friends, right? And then so the people who work there know you by name and loves you, and then so it's just a very relaxing place to be where you can actually be more authentic.
It's very true.
And nicer to everyone. So.
And I'm the course I grew up on was not a white collar club. The vast majority of our members were blue collar. This is central rural Maine, so we don't really have a whole lot of rich people. In fact, the wealthiest man in Maine was a member, but you were like you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at him.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things about having money in Maine is like there's no stores or places to spend it, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it is kind of like nature's a great equalizer in that sense, and the golf course is quite equalizing as well. Then when I went off to, I was pretty good at golf, and as a result of being a member there and being able to practice a lot.
Yeah.
And then I went off to a fancy boarding school called Lilian Wang.
Yeah.
And some of those kids, right, they're from southern states. The golf season's a lot longer, right? And they think of Maine as some like rube state. And then I took great pleasure in beating rich kids from Connecticut. It was one of my favorite things to do. Back then.
I had a really hard time whenever my parents would try to shuttle me into private schools, and it's like we consistently get myself out so I can go to public schools.
You went to public school in Vancouver?
Yeah. So I luckily, very, very fortunately, got myself into a very specialized accelerated program in a public school. So then I got to get out of private school, so it was really great. Yeah.
Terrific. And then what your collegiate education and advanced degrees? Did you go to school in Canada as well?
Yeah, I went to school in Canada. So I went to University of Toronto, where I was very blessed to have received an amazing scientific education. Probably
It's a very good school.
Yeah.
I've been on the campus.
Yeah, I would say it's probably one of the best science programs for an undergrad degree. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So Dad's a golf historian. My mother is a Canadian Studies professor.
Oh, wow.
She ran the Canadian Studies department at Duke University for a little while.
Nice.
So I know a little bit more about Canada than the average American, I think. One of the things that's very interesting to me is when I tell Americans that my mother is a Canadian Studies professor. Sometimes people understand that and they think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Other times they're like, why would that be a thing? Why would anyone study Canada, right? Canada's America's hat, right? But in reality, Canada's our number one trading partner economically and culturally. It's the longest peaceable border in unguarded in human history, right? Like there's just same language, shared culture, like you mentioned, right? We think of the French, right? But the English were part founders of Canada as well, which is the same. So that's our colonial masters as well.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous. It's like when you go up there, like everything's a little bit different, but not really that different.
Yeah.
It's like watching a Mentos commercial or something. Well, I mean, I would say America's a very big place, right? And some places are friendlier than others.
Yeah. For sure.
I live in D.C. now, and one of the things that's been very hard for me to get used to, as compared to Maine, where I grew up, is that in Maine you would never walk past someone without acknowledging them.
Yeah.
Never.
Oh,
it's
wow,
unthinkable.
that's amazing.
Well, because you don't see people that often.
Right.
So you would never just like hear like you.
So you see two humans a day. It's like hello.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, some people don't see. I mean, for a while I lived almost a mile away from my neighbor. So when you do see your neighbor, you certainly acknowledge him, right? It's part of being human, right? But in DC, sometimes I still do it because I really can't stop. It's ingrained in me. I smile and nod at strangers as I walk past them. And sometimes they look appalled. They look at me appalled.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so have you even had people ask, like, what? Excuse me?
You know what?
Do I know you? Right? I'm like, no, not yet.
Not yet.
I'm Dave. Right? But I don't know, they're in DC and they're very busy and they're important. They can't possibly be bothered. Can't possibly be bothered to connect with the humans who are near them, right? Or what possible benefit could that have?
Yeah. You know what? I've been spending the last month or so in New York for the summer, and to my shock, New Yorkers are probably the nicest, most loving, nurturing people I have ever
wherever that stereotype is that they're not friendly.
It's so bizarre.
It's one of the reasons why I do like to. It's very different from. So in a lot of ways, New York and DC are very similar.
Yeah.
But the one way where it's very different is you can totally walk around New York smiling and saying hello to pretty much everybody.
Yeah,
and they're gonna be like, hey, how you doing?
I know. And everyone just.
And it really does feel a lot. It's just a much nicer way to be.
Yeah.
I think the DC very, particularly the northwest district of DC is very transitional. A lot of people are there just to do like a couple years at a fellowship or do an internship somewhere, and then they're going to move to New York eventually, right? Yeah. And then when they get to New York, they're like, now I'm home. Now I can talk to people. Now I can learn my neighbors, right? Well, I'm here in DC. I'm focused on, right? I work at I work for Senator Blobbity Blop, right? He's that's not a real So I realize you're Canadian. Maybe you don't know all of our senators. Blobbity blop.
Yeah.
I totally disagree with his politics. Honestly, if there's a Senator Blobbity blop out there, he'd be better than what we have now.
Yeah.
Let's see here. You were mentioning before, I liked the story of your father walking into the club. Can you tell me a little bit more about your parents?
Yeah, so my parents are incredible humans. I am
I'm sure
grateful.
that's true.
Yeah, honestly though, I'm so grateful that they're my parents. They came from rural farmlands in Taiwan, which was back then, I don't know if it was even a developing country back then. It probably was, or a third world country. And they were, to this day, probably the only people who got a university education from their respective villages. My mom literally came from a village in the middle of the highest mountain in Taiwan. The odds of that are just so impossible, right? And then so they actually, not only did they manage to find their way into the capital and got a university degree, they managed to have, against all odds, which, impossible odds, managed to build a hardware tech startup in the 80s and 90s. And then they're just also such wholesome human beings, And then so they actually managed to retire in the 90s. And then so my dad literally retired because he wanted to ensure that when we all moved to Canada to educate me and my younger brother, that we would have a wholesome family. So he wanted to be there.
Wow. Yes, you are very lucky.
Yeah, I'm exceptional. So I'm really grateful. So he's instilling me a lot of really incredible wholesome values that I hold very dear to me.
Talk to me more about those values. What do you think is it? I mean, in my experience, people who defied the odds, right, do so because they had very strong values.
Yeah.
And I also don't think that necessarily just sort of happens to you.
Yeah.
I think I think values get instilled.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I think in general we're born like good people.
Yeah, I think
right?
everyone is actually born good people.
But values are far more specific than just good people, right?
Yeah.
Like generosity is different from humility, which is different from influence, which is different from the candor, right? Which is different from what is the thing that Bush Senior used to say? Wouldn't be prudent. Prudence. Prudence is probably my least favorite of the values.
Yeah.
There's actually there's an organization called 2164 that does it helps. It does consulting on like intergenerational philanthropy and stuff like that. And they have a really cool exercise where there's a little deck of cards.
Yeah.
And each card has a different value on it. Yeah. And they're all good values, right? Like prudence is in there and generosity and all that. Yeah. And the exercise is that you have to put them in order of importance.
Yeah. Oh,
and it's really like picking the first one that's most important to you. You do that really quickly, and then you see another one. You're like, no, that's more important. No, that's more important.
Yeah.
And then you think you've got it, and then you see that you've put the one that you've put in the end is actually you think that's it becomes very, very difficult, right?
Fascinating.
But you have to you can't play one. The lesson is you can't place equal emphasis on every single one of your values.
Yeah.
And it's very thoughtful. For years, I kept that. I actually lost the deck, just lost it. But for years, I kept it in my backpack, and pretty much every Sunday, I would sort of reorganize based on my priorities of that week.
Yeah.
So for a very long time, I wanted to be more influential. Mm-hmm. So influence and power were near the top of my things, right? I want to be able to, right? And now I feel like I've become a little bit influential. So being helpful and candid with that influence is more important to me now than when I was in my 20s when I was trying to build. I was focused more on building my network, meeting more people, right, and stuff, which is still important. Influence is still in the deck, right? But just and sometimes you do have to put aside, in order to build your influence, you have to put being candid aside for just unfortunately for just a moment, right? Don't necessarily lie or be honest, right?
But it's interesting because my value systems are that if I just work on aligning my system, so making sure that my heart, my soul, my body, my mind is all aligned and every part of me is in agreement at all times, which requires doing yoga or meditating or just really taking care of myself so I can come to that sort of clarity, then all I have to do is follow my heart, let my heart lead. And so I don't judge anyone whatsoever, and then when I just flow with that, I meet the most incredible humans and the most amazing, extraordinary things happen when I meet them. And then so
Terrific.
I never felt like I had to try to do anything. I just know what opens my heart and makes me feel truly alive, and everything just falls into place.
So what would you say are the primary, the most 3 important values in the Wang family?
In the Wang family, oh wow, I don't know if I can speak for my parents, but
I'm not really asking
but
you.
I mean, yeah,
But they hopefully they instilled some values in you, and you can now answer this question.
For sure. Yeah, so I think I can perceive it from as a daughter for my family, and mind you, they my parents, my father and my mother, and maybe my younger brother would have different views, and that's totally amazing. But the way I see it is that being wholesome and being a good person with integrity is.
You've said wholesome a couple times now.
Yeah.
Can you define wholesome for me?
Yeah, just do the right things, have integrity, character, and just everything you do. My father used to say this to me: doing business is like learning how to be a good human. Right? He made it very clear that there's no short-term gain. Everything is a long-term gain. It's all about building the relationship, building the trust, and having that long-term, lifelong friendship with these people.
That's very nice.
Yeah, who he's like, I don't really know. He would always say this to me, and it's, I'm really grateful for that. He always said, especially when I was first starting out, people did business with me not because I was the best, but because they really trusted me and loved me and wanted me to succeed. And knew that I would take care of them. And that to me was always, and so you can consider how shocked I was when I first entered the corporate world.
Yes.
And saw that
not everybody necessarily.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of the very successful people will agree with your father.
Okay.
But I would also say, so integrity would be the value that you're talking about there, I think.
Definitely.
And maybe even a little compassion, right? Understanding that the other people need to be serviced, right?
Yeah.
But I would push back a little bit and say that I'm sure those are the values of your family.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's very concerning to me is I think about integrity a lot. We do have integrity listed as one of the organizational values of Unfunded List.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of the things that's frustrating to me about integrity is particularly American society, but I do think even global society, we don't reward integrity as often as we should.
I think we do. I think
do.
that people are just too short-term thinking. I really think that.
So yes, okay. That's a very interesting counterpoint. So I'm gonna clarify, right?
Yeah.
I've been, and one of the things that I do want to point out is that being able to have integrity is a privilege.
Yeah.
Like I said, right?
It is such a privilege.
Not everybody can afford it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes integrity you lose your job, and that's what I'm talking about here.
Absolutely. I feel like
we don't necessarily it's not 100% of the time where if you have integrity in that situation that you will get rewarded.
Yeah, unless you put food on the table, you don't even have the rights or the privilege really to be able to say you have character, value, integrity. That is very.
And even if they can't afford that short-term loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though it would benefit them long-term.
Yeah.
Right. So I do benefit long-term from having integrity. You're absolutely right about that. But I don't I've lost on things as well. And there's plenty of people in the world who are getting rewarded. Not just with an absence of integrity, but with anti-integrity. Right. There are people who in this city, not that far away from us, right, who package bad mortgages and bad debt into really bad investments, and that already crashed the economy once, and they're doing it again. And the reason why they're doing it again is because they're getting rewarded by society because they keep making money doing it.
So there's 2 things I wanted to say about this. One is that it's such a privilege, and I used to feel exceptionally guilty about this. It's who am I to have so much privilege, right? Who am I to have so much when really all I want to do is help, right? And so and truly it was realizing that I have this personal responsibility to myself, the integrity to myself, to make sure that I am nurtured, healthy, happy, so that I can contribute the most as an individual myself, that allow me to, and I had to do a lot of self-love sort of work so that I can, get rid of the shame, the guilt of having so much, and then so that I can actually start to contribute. And then the second thing I want to say about that is that, you don't look at yourself and say, oh, you know, great, my right arm's having cancer. Let's just chop it off, right? We're kind of all-ing it.
Well, I'm not a doctor.
You know, so we're kind of all-ing it together. So it's almost silly to think that we're not all-ing it together. And then so I think it's very short-sighted, you know, to think that you know, we could, you know, in the short term do things that won't fundamentally. You know, and then even for us,
You should love the stranger because you were a stranger once.
Yeah,
and I think the guy who's packaging bad debt and selling it to folks he does not understand that.
He doesn't understand it.
He's like, well, I'm not a stranger, and I'm and there's a really great line in the movie The Big Short. Where this guy I'm talking about basically, and he says, someone says you're a horrible person, and he looks back and he says, maybe, but society rewards what I do at a very high level.
Yeah.
And he's right about that.
Yeah, and I don't think society's winning either, right? We're rapidly killing ourselves.
Well, it causes the economy to crash. Rewarding him at the level that it does causes the economy to crash. This is very bad. we do need to stop this. One of the so I love every organization that makes the unfunded list equally. But one of the ones that's very dear to me because they were the very first folks who applied, and they made the first unfunded list. And in fact, I had worked with this organization before I founded Unfunded List. The organization is called Accountability Lab, and they actually do, my favorite program that they do is called Integrity Idol.
Oh, wow.
So you're familiar with American Idol? I think there is even a Canadian Idol. I think I've heard of that. Canadians are extremely talented people, right? Yeah, I mean Celine Dion, I could there's a lot of very good. Leonard Cohen is Canadian. Like some of my favorite singers of all time are Canadian. And my mom's a Canadian studies professor, so that may have something to do with it.
I love that you know so much about Canadians, because I think you know more about Canadians than I do, which is phenomenal.
Great, but it's every day is a school day, right? So you still have opportunity to learn.
I'm learning right now.
So Integrity Idol is I think they started in Nepal, and I think it's also in Liberia now, and maybe in some other places. It's hard to keep track of with all the unfunded. But this is it's a cash prize for the public official with the most integrity. And if I remember correctly, I don't want to get this wrong, but it was the first prize recipient was like an extremely low-level government official, because this was Nepal. It's wildly corrupt, and they weren't, and corruption was being rewarded. So, in order to find the official with the most integrity, he was like deputy assistant of a local school district or something. And he was like the only guy that had never taken a bribe. And like he was a real stand-up guy and everything, and he ended up winning money, right? There's also there is a one of the wealthiest Africans. I don't remember their name because but his daughter came to speak. At a previous Nexus. I think the name's Ibrahim. And they're Egyptian or something of that sort. And there's a prize for African leaders. So if you get elected to office in Africa and you leave when you're supposed to, they give you $1 million. Awesome.
When you're supposed to instead of
it's not exact. It's something like that, right? But this is an enormous problem in Africa. How are you going to stop it? They're not leaving when they're supposed to. Right? Here's some money, right? And the cost of them not leaving when they're supposed to far exceeds the money. And so right when you've got a society that's we're gonna like Mugabe gets rewarded for his behavior, and you've left on time, right? You were supposed to. You do not get rewarded. Good luck. You might even get imprisoned by the new party that came in, right? Or something of that sort, right? And like someone needs to, you need to integrity on it's like it does feel good, right? But like, there are ways I think for lots of people across sectors to find ways to give short-term reward to integrity. I think we should have Integrity Idol in America, right? Not just because I think I'd be in the running for it.
Maybe you should.
Well, I think if we were to do it here in America, if we were to do it with only government officials, I think we'd find that we had the same situation that Nepal did, and that it would end up being an extremely low-level government official. It would be, because I live in D.C., right? And I think a lot of people sort of have a misconception of D.C. because the people you hear about, right, the political appointees that run the agencies, right? Most of the federal workers in D.C. and in other cities, there's federal workers all over the country. They're career folks. They work at the Securities and Exchange Commission because they want to regulate there's a lot of people working at the EPA right now who do not like the direction of the EPA, right? These are good, hardworking people that aren't like they went there, to do good, and they're not the ones that get talked about they don't get invited to the panel shows. They're not winning Integrity Idol. They're not necessarily getting new. I mean, they're getting their like they got a good government job, right?
Yeah.
They're getting a raise every 6 months.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like not it's not so bad for them, right?
Yeah.
They're not getting like there's no opportunity to get to like Donald Trump level of influence without right doing Donald Trump level nonsense.
Yeah, and it's so true, right? It's, you know, this Asian Day, I think about how I can have the most amount of personal impact, and really, you don't really get to have really any true impact unless you have a $20 billion company, right? You can't say,
I don't
hey,
have a $20 billion company. I think I've had impact.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I know, but I mean, you know, the kind of impact that I personally want to have, it's like I can't say, hey, I want to solve the space issue unless I was, you know, Bezos or Musk, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
But I'd point out, like, those people aren't solving those things.
Right, but at least they get to say, I get a seat at the table to try, right? Whereas, what can I do, right? Even if I'm a, you know, fairly good scientist in some way and want to, you know, contribute in a certain field, you know, it's really, really difficult.
Yes, it is difficult. Social change is very difficult. So let's I told you that I wanted to interview for a podcast about philanthropy, and you gave me a response that other guests have given. I'm not a philanthropist.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, unless they can contribute. Over,
and I think and the reason I think you say that is right because you sort of think of it as contributing over a certain level.
Yeah.
Right?
Unless I have real impact, you know, who am I to say I'm a philanthropist, right?
I mean, what's the philanthropist is a very simple word, right? It's just for people who give back to society, right, or contributing to society with some sort of capital, right?
Yeah.
Like it does. If you look it up in the dictionary, it doesn't say over 1 million must be given in order to be a philanthropist, right? There is literally no definition of philanthropist that has a number attached to it, right? And you ran food drives at your local community center. Like you're a philanthropist.
Okay.
100%.
Awesome.
I don't have any doubt about this.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
And you were saying how you interview men and female philanthropists, and
yes, we have. And you will appear in a season that we've been calling Season Sh3.
Yeah.
So it will be only the third season of this podcast will be only females.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
And we were talking about this beforehand, and and what I find, having done this for a few years now. I really like interviewing women a lot more than men on these topics. Men tend to they know what they're doing, and they're sort of lecturing me about their program, and they don't necessarily respond to my questions very well. And I mean, we've had some good conversations. In particular, I found that like. The men that I know personally, right? So my friend Victor Bogachev, Rod Roddenberry, my good friend Ben Swig, and our great grandfathers were friends. So that was a very good. That was a pretty good episode. And some of those have gone well, but the more established male philanthropists. That I don't know personally, right? Those have not been. Actually, I haven't aired some of them. In fact, the most significant donor I ever interviewed, I don't think I'm ever going to air the episode because I don't think anybody could learn from that episode, because he is, you know, he came from a different time when men were men, right, and when younger men and women didn't question older men. Right. He doesn't. When I'm there asking him questions, he really doesn't understand. Why is this kid asking me stuff? Right?
Yeah, he just has this program that he's running on. He's saying,
and you know, he's done it for a very long time, and people have been awarding him at galas and stuff for a very long time. So he doesn't have much reason to think that my questions have any validity to them at all. But contrast that to. I interviewed a woman for this season, Anita Zucker, who she does not think she knows everything, and she's got a lot more money than that dude did, and is a lot more successful, and has been a better philanthropist than he is.
That's incredible.
But she doesn't like. In some ways, right? I want to see men and women meet in the middle on this stuff, right? I don't think. I think some of the timidity and fear that female philanthropists have holds them back from having influence. And I'll say, like, I've like you told me you're not a philanthropist.
Yeah.
You don't know, you can't have impact unless you have a $20 billion company,
Yeah.
right? Like, what can you possibly do?
Yeah.
Like, I need to, if anything gets through to you in this
Yeah.
interview, you are, to
Yeah.
quote my hero, Mr. Rogers, you are special just for being you.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount that you can do in the world. You don't need to have a $20 billion company.
Yeah, and I think
right?
you can say that about, I think that's true for every single person in the world. We all have our unique gifts.
We're talking, and that's a nice sentiment, but right now I'm talking about you.
Okay.
And like you have a tremendous amount of unique gifts, and as you've mentioned, a lot of privilege. You clearly raised by great parents who instilled great values in you, integrity and wholesomeness. I guess is that you're
so kind and generous, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And don't underestimate the power of having a strong education.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
and you should continue to learn and use that. And being in a network like Nexus amplifies your impact by an enormous amount, right? It not only by opening doors to places like NASA, right, and you get to meet Dave Moss, right? No, and lots of other folks, right?
Sure.
Right, and you can, like, one of the things my grandmother used to say when we did philanthropy together was that there's always more money in the Rolodex than in the checking account. And that was before I became a member of Nexus. Now, yes, my checking account has much less money than my Rolodex, right? Because there are in the building, there's several billionaires downstairs. And I've interviewed a few for just the podcast alone has a lot more money than my checking account. I don't underestimate how little money there is in my checking account at the moment, right? I've been running a nonprofit for a few years now,
and there's also that concept of But
my impact has right. I haven't made money in the last few years, and as a result, haven't been able to do the normal amount of philanthropy that I do. Most of it goes to supporting my own program, or like my living expenses because I do need to eat and sleep and breathe and stuff. But my impact has increased over that. Even though I'm giving less, I have because I've leveraged it into this program. We are able to help a lot more people, right? And I think, now that I think you picked up on it, right? There's a fun question I do like to ask. Let's say you do have $20 billion, right? Sorcerer comes by, waves a wand, you've got $20 billion, right? How are you going to have your impact now?
So as a scientist, I love to be able to get a ton of data and just do a lot of data analysis on it. And I bet you anything, there's probably 5 to 20 levers around the globe that are very, very strong levers where we could deploy the least amount of cash and that'll have the most amount of impact. For example, clean water, right? And think about how
you're talking about effective altruism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I think there's already really incredible metrics now that are being conducted.
There's a lot. We a while ago I interviewed the program officer from the Open Philanthropy Project and GiveWell. And they're kind of pioneers on this stuff. They in fact have a very similar list to ours, a much different methodology, right? And so this is about where can we have the really measuring the total amount of impact.
For sure.
And I find it very interesting, right? But like some of their conclusions I find a little bit bizarre, right?
Well, we got as individually and as organizations, I think it's really important that we try different things, and then as a scientist, you try 10 things, you expect 9 to fail, right? And then so Edison tried how many materials before he found the one that created the light bulb, right? So I don't think it's a bad thing that we're trying different things and trying to figure out what works, but it's important that we try.
I don't think their current methodology is flawless, but what I like about it is that they probably don't think that either, right? And they're continuing to work on it as well. In particular, they hold, and this is true of most effective altruists. Like saving a life should be the goal of philanthropy, right? If you can, for $1, right, you should give it to the organization that will save the most lives, right? I think save a life is a far more nebulous concept than a scientist might want to admit,
for sure.
right? Let's say, for instance, there are no, as a result of their methodology, there are no arts projects on their list.
For sure.
If we save every single life on the planet, but there's no art,
then what happens?
Great. That sounds we've got a whole new problem.
Yeah.
Right, and who even knows what kind of problems could come out of that, right?
So this is where I have this personal view, which I think you might find very interesting. So when you look at a forest, right, you look at a forest and you're instantly at peace, and you think that it's incredibly beautiful, right? And then when you're looking at forests, there's trees, tall trees, short trees, there's grass, there's fungi, there's insects, there's animals, and there's all kinds of stuff, right? Pollens, all kinds of stuff. You don't go and say, oh, the tree's too tall, it should be a fungi, right? Yet in our human society, we seem to think that for some reason that we all have to think the same things, that we all have to behave the same way. When I actually think that it's the diversity of how we're all fundamentally different and will contribute differently, that will create the most abundant, flourishing ecosystem. So in terms of philanthropy, I think everyone probably has different views, and I think if we can somehow, in our own ways, contribute somehow, collectively as a whole, it will probably work really well, and especially when we reach some kind of equilibrium. Yeah.
Have you ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
No. I mean, it's down somehow.
It's a very famous book by a philosopher. It's one of the more famous books on philosophy.
Yeah.
Written by an American, anyway.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really like about it is you wouldn't think motorcycle maintenance and Zen, what could they possibly have in common? But by the end of the book, you're like, well, I can't think of anything more Zen than motorcycle maintenance.
Yeah.
And in particular, he talks about and he uses your example of the forest, right?
Oh, nice.
Some people will look at a forest,
Yeah.
right, and I forget one of these is the classical view, and one of these is the romantic view,
Yeah.
right? You're either a romanticist or a classicist.
Yeah.
And I forget which is which, but one of them would see individual trees, low growth, high growth, start thinking about the individual components of the forest, right? Others just see forest, right? Similar to a motorcycle, right? Some people just see some people look at a motorcycle and they see, well, there's the carburetor and there's the engine and there's the fuel gauge and the I don't know if there's pistons or whether the wheel is attached to the axle and this stuff. Other people just see motorcycle, meat of conveyance, right? And it's you can look at something and just sort of and you look at the forest and you feel peace, right? But that's not if you don't see the trees, right? That's not oneness. That's not full Zen. You're going to be missing things, right? So and he also, one of my favorite parts of the book is he talks about electrical substations, right? So you've ever seen, you know what I'm talking about, it'll be fenced off. You've been warned not to go in there because you'll get electrocuted, right?
I'm unfortunately very familiar with
Yes. Well, we think of those as outside, it has nothing to do with us. It's it's not part of our world. Right? You go around it. You don't think about what's in there. You don't think about what those components are doing, right? It's not part of you. Right? But you use electricity every single day. It is part. That is a very important part of your life, right? But we go past. We don't think about them. We're trying to remove it from the universe that we're in, right? And that's why. So if you get frustrated trying to fix your motorcycle, right? It's probably because you're not thinking about all the individual parts or anything. I was trying to install a new lock on my door, right? And I was trying to do it I was trying to skip some of the steps to get it in there, right? And I was just hopefully just I wasn't lining the screw up, right? I was just hoping that the screw would find no, it never did, right? You have to go back and do that actual step in order to, and that's so the. I think that's anyway. You should your forest comment reminded me of that. I want to go back earlier. So you've got this the fictional. $20 billion endowed Lilian Wang Foundation, right? You're gonna collect a lot of data and look for inflection points. And then what? And then.
So because I think.
But you've got 20 billion, so you should be able to get the data, find the inflection points, and still have 19.8 billion left.
To be honest, and I feel like it's actually surprisingly expensive to actually deploy something and have it really be effective long term.
Fine. Let's say it's a $1 trillion endowment. Well, $10 trillion, just in case.
To be able to make that money myself instead of having endowment, So anyways, and so
But in this hypothetical situation, you've already got it.
And so regardless, I think I would love to be able to. I don't think that I want to be the one to, dictate any of these things, right? I would love for it to be something where we come together, you know, a lot of stakeholders from all over the world, from local, on the ground entrepreneurs who are doing actual good, actually understand their local needs, to some of the, you know, most powerful world leaders and entrepreneurs and people to come together and open source in a way and contribute together somehow. And then, but regardless, to really find inflection points where, for example, fresh water, right, is so important, right? And then, you know, we deploy so much cash into, you know, helping malaria aid and in different capacities, and then eventually they probably figure out that, oh wow, fresh water was the most effective thing to do, right? And same with many other things, right? So I think going back to the fundamentals and creating those fundamental abundance seem to be a thing that I think might be a thing. Yeah, so, but I don't know, but I think it's about the data, right? And then it's about, you know, how do we collectively as a whole, as a humanity, can become abundant and through the pyramid of needs, so that we can all have that physical safety and physical abundance, and that emotional safety, emotional abundance, so that we can flourish together, you know, and really be a really beautiful force in an ecosystem where we're all thriving and working together, and, you know, yeah. So I don't know what that looks like, but I think it would be really amazing if everyone can participate somehow.
I think the real trick will be like, you know, once we have, let's say we spend some of your endowment and we get access to all the data and we learn and we learn a lot more, right? Then I think the real hard part will start in getting people to like actually collaborate and cooperate it, because what's going to happen inevitably is some people are like, well, I didn't collect the data, so or whatever they'll make up, right? Like right, or I'm not going to get enough credit for participating in this. Actually, or like some other related, you're going to need to be able to tackle that as well.
So I think on that, I have an interesting perspective from my time spent as a scientist on that. When you have any metrics to measure success, people usually want to be on the successful team, right? So let's say
people like being relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And then so you can actually use that, right? So for example,
relevance is one of the cards in the deck.
Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, because I personally don't give a shit about that. So, but however, if everybody else cares about that, then you can actually give that away to people, and then create a really powerful engine where people are given more relevance and more, you know, like legitimacy, because they get to participate in something that really works really quick, and by collaborating, it's much faster, right? And so I'll give you an example to make it more tangible, because it probably sounds very nebulous right now.
No, well, it makes sense to me, but I want to hear your example.
Yeah, so when I was a scientist, started my first year PhD, right? My thesis was one that was such a novel concept. I literally didn't have any government grants, right? And then, but I just had a gut feel that this is gonna work, right? And then so what I did was that I figured out what 5 experiments I need to do so that I can attempt to publish a top tier journal. And then so what I did was that back then in the scientific community or in any other community, you know, everybody wants that legitimacy. Everyone wants to be that person, the hero, right? I really don't care about that. I'm just thinking about, okay, well, if I want to do something, I want to be successful at it, right? And then actually have impact. And so I was like, okay, you know what? Let me convince 5 people who are each individually good at doing these experiments to do with me, and I will offer them first authorship on my paper if we were to succeed, which is very attractive, and nobody does that, right? This is, you know, 13,
I like it. That was one of the strategies Oliver was talking about this morning.
Awesome, yeah. So I gave that away freely, which is very important for them.
That's how LBJ got the Civil Rights Act passed.
Oh, amazing. So
he let the Republicans take credit.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what I did was that so you know how it is. So I think we probably finished maybe 2 to 5 or even 10 years worth of work, probably 2 to 5 years worth of work in probably 2 or 3 months, because instead of trying to do something myself for 3 to 12 months or even more, we would just try once or twice and it would work, and then we just had to repeat it 2 more times to have publishable data, right? And so it was really fast. So I wonder if it could be the same thing, where if we could prove that it actually works better and everyone can contribute and everyone can have name recognition somehow, and I'm not the hero, you know, because that's not the point, right? Impact is the point, right? What if we could do that? And then if suddenly we were the most, you know, impactful team in the world, then everybody might start to want to collaborate, right? Because, you know, fundamentally, that will just be faster, right? So that's how I feel about it.
Yes, I think that was all very smart.
Well, we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I haven't tried it yet, so who knows?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I point out there are some historical examples of that tactic working quite well.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to make sure that you get a chance to enjoy the rest of Nexus.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lovely and good-looking folks downstairs to talk to and meet.
Yeah.
But before we go, do you have any questions for me or parting thoughts or anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I don't know. I think that if everyone can just, you know, really do the work to make sure that they're, you know, aligned and making decisions from a heart space, it's really integral. I think collectively we'll all be in a much better place, and that things will probably work out a lot better for everyone. Yeah.
When you look at the forest, do you see the forest or do you see individual trees?
All of it.
Both?
Yeah.
You're a classicist and a romanticist?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one or the other, right?
Because, well, for
non-duality.
Phaedra would disagree with you. No, a lot of people do think that people are one or the other, right? But that we need, like, that's what sort of yin and yang is saying. Like, there are.
Right? Yeah, it's a probability.
Or Paula Abdul would say opposites attract.
Yeah. I mean, until we learn that we're everything in black and white and we all learn to work together, we'll always have, you know, polarity and conflict, which is really unnecessary, you know?
That's what makes the atom work. Right?
True.
I'm not a physicist. I got a BA in theater.
That too, yeah.
I did get a 5 on the AP physics exam.
Yeah.
So I remember my molecular stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
All right, great. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Margaret, for your help recording.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of Nexus.
Yeah, thank you.